Retired homicide detective. I've interviewed thousands of people, from serial killers to ministers. Welcome to the interview room. Welcome to the interview room, everybody. What an exciting Sunday evening. Again, man, have we got a lineup for you this evening. A wonderful show. As you can tell, we've got Dr. Gary Brucato and, of course, attorney John Ray, who represents not only Shannan Gilbert, but Jessica Taylor in the Long Island serial case going on out there. So before we get started tonight, a big thank you to our mods, Miss Sophia, Mimi J2, Maui Girl, and Teresa M. Thank you all so much for everything that you do. You keep the chat classy and you keep it above the waterline. So for that, we can never thank you enough. If you're new to the show this evening, we only ask one thing, and that's that you hit that subscribe button. And then when at the conclusion of this show, that you share it with as many people as you know on your social media networks, and we get this information out around the world. And of course, we like to thank Dr. Gary Brucato being here again. We sure love Gary. He is a visiting scholar from Boston College, where he collaborates with Dr. Ann Burgess and Dr. Victor Petreka on forensic research. He's the co-author of the Columbia University Mass Database, which is the largest mass database in the world for mass shooters. And of course, we just had that situation up in Maine, and I'm sure Gary will be studying that, for in his research there. And he's also the co-author of The New Evil. That's the book right behind me. If you've not had an opportunity to go get it, it is The Understanding the Emergence of Modern Violent Crime. His books are always linked in our description below. And for having Gary here this evening, we're so grateful. He reached out to me and said, hey, we need to get hold of attorney John Ray. They appeared together on Court TV, and he thought this would be a very delightful conversation. And of course, I think Gary's always right in this category. So I've had an opportunity to talk to John behind the scenes. And let me introduce attorney John Ray. And this is an amazing human being, ladies and gentlemen. John is a father, a family man. He's representing not only Shannan Gilbert's family, but of course, Jessica's family. But more importantly, on top of his 41 years of workhorse experience as a litigator, he is a lacrosse goalie for over 57 years. And he's a family man, and he loves that sport. And, he's a guy right after my heart, because anybody who is still engaged in a sport with that much passion has got to be passionate about representing not only families, but down to the minutia details. So, gentlemen, thank you both for being here. John, thank you. And Gary, thank you again for kind of pipelining this one here. We're so grateful for you. All right, so let's recap, everybody. If you're not familiar with the Long Island serial case at this point and the suspect Heuermann, here's just a quick rundown here. He's been charged with 3 murders and the death of 3 women: Melissa Bartholomew, Megan Waterman, and Amber Costello. They were all found on Gilgo Beach on Long Island, New York. And Heuermann has been named as a prime suspect in the death of Maureen Bernard Barnes, but has not been charged yet. And it was the search for John's family's client, or John's family's daughter, Shannan Gilbert, that led police to find 10 sets of remains, including 8 women on the beach in Gilgo. But Gilbert has not been connected to Heuermann yet, up until now. And tonight we're going to have a conversation about Shannan's case, as well as some of the information that John has most recently stepped forward, saying that he's communicated with some very interesting witnesses. And in fact, he's obtained some affidavits from those witnesses that I hope tonight you as an audience are going to be able to ask some questions from John, as well as Dr. Brucato and myself. But in these 2 affidavits, they give out some really, really fascinating information, and I'm going to let Attorney Ray talk about those as we get along here. So with that, John, welcome to the show again. So excited to have you here.
Thank you.
So how did we get here? How did these 2 come forward, and tell us a little bit about the backstory on that.
Well, yes, thank you, Chris. A very nice introduction. The backstory is that Rodney Harrison, who's the Suffolk County Police Commissioner and has been since a year ago, January, came into this case and changed the entire aspect of the case. It was really a quasi-cold case. In fact, the way it was being treated by the police, there was only one police officer, not even full-time, working on the case, a homicide detective for years. And Rodney brought a change to all that. He came, one of the very first things he did was he came to my office, called me, said he wanted to meet. And he came to my office with some detectives, and we hit it off. We had a very good meeting. And it was at that meeting that he committed to revealing the 911 tapes that I had acquired by way of a lawsuit against the police department, several lawsuits and appeals. And I had finally won and got the tapes, but I couldn't use them publicly without the permission of the commissioner. He agreed to release those tapes at that meeting. We became friends, very good friends. And we worked together on, quiet, as it were, over the course of that time since then. And instead of shutting me down and pushing me out with the information I had, which the police had originally done, now the opposite was occurring. And so people began to call more frequently with witnesses that instead of me having to sort of root them out and find them, they began to call. And these 2 witnesses came forward after Heuermann was arrested, and they wanted to speak to me. So there are actually 4 witnesses who came forward. 2 of them gave affidavits. The other 2 just gave me oral statements. But collectively, they all pointed the finger at Rex Heuermann and frankly, put his wife into the mix as well. So they were significant. Now, bottom line was credibility. Are these people making it up? Are they imagining it? People do that. Do they just have could there be some weird thing going on? You never know. There's plenty of people like that who've come forward to me. I can't tell you the number of people I have in my file who come in and say, my husband is the killer. So you have to check for all those things. When I interviewed these women extensively. The first woman, who was the swinger, I interviewed for almost 3 hours the first time. Then I met her face to face and interviewed her again for another 3 hours. And then I interviewed her one more time. And then with 2 detectives from the Suffolk County Homicide Squad, with Rodney's specific direction, they met with her and with me to basically hear her story and qualify her credibility. Likewise, for the taxi driver who had, neither one of these women had any skin in the game, as you've heard that phrase being used. They had no reason to do what they were doing and coming forward other than altruistic reasons, personal reasons. And the taxi cab driver, Rodney Harrison himself, the commissioner, came with me. We rented a room in New York City, met her, and spoke to her after I had qualified her for several hours as well, before that meeting took place. And then Rodney himself questioned her. And so we qualified her. And with that in mind, with those two affidavits in hand, Rodney and I came up with a joint press conference at my office, wherein Rodney basically told people, if you don't want to go to the police, if you have, and in sex cases, that's often true, you have various reasons not to want to come forward, you can talk to John Ray. You should. And so ever since then, that's just multiplied the number of people who have called me and have given me new evidence. I just got new evidence just several minutes before I came on this show. It just came into my office.
Can you share that? Can you share it?
Only that there's other evidence at this point. There's other evidence that seems to inculpate Heuermann and involves sex and cocaine and crack. That much I can say. More than that, I can't. I don't reveal what these people tell me unless they give me permission.
Totally understand.
So I'm not going to talk about what the substance of that was, nor who the person, but they're coming in. And, when I told people that a few months ago, back in August, there was a lot of skepticism that I had a witness. Well, I did. I had several of them. And now you know that we do have them. So they keep coming and they keep revealing more. And there's other ones too, besides that there are other ones who've come in with other information.
It's interesting because I think the public forgets, and I think we all know on this panel, that when you have a case of this magnitude and it's dealing with potentially, sometimes people don't rack up the credibility, in perception from the street. But in reality, 9 out of 10 times, I can tell you how many murders I've solved when it was somebody that, just the general society had said, nah, don't believe them, when in reality, they were telling it just the way it was. And in this case, I mean, you've got so many moving parts. We'll fill us in. What do we have in terms of, you got a taxi driver. What is her statement in relationship to this case?
Well, the taxi driver who gave a sworn statement, an affidavit, she has no connection to sex or to drugs, to sex parties, to prostitution, and so on. She has no connections like that. In fact, she was and is a solid citizen who worked during the day in a very decent job and drove taxis at night to supplement her income for her children and grandchildren. And so she comes into this objectively. But when she saw certain things on TV, including Heuermann, that triggered her memories of things that she had come forward about before and had been ignored. So she called me. Now, what she says is that effectively, or essentially, I should say, is that back in 2009, sometime she believes in the fall, and Shannan disappears May 1st, 2010. So it's several months before Shannan disappears.
Okay.
This driver was called by her dispatcher to visit the Sayville Motor Lodge, which is a motel, single-story motel, long strip motel on a large street called Sunrise Highway on Long Island in a town called Sayville. She was called to go to the Sayville Motor Lodge and pick up a girl who had called in and was in a bathroom and would be coming out of the bathroom to her. And she was to flash her lights and beep her horn because the girl had called from the bathroom. And so she went there, she did that, nobody came out. And then eventually a man came out, a very large man who she identifies as Heuermann. And he had his hands up over his face in this way and was running away from the lights and went into an SUV, which matched the description. It was an SUV or a truck. I'm not sure exactly what the description was, but it matched the description of Heuermann's, what it turns out to be his avalanche. That was the first encounter that she had. She complained to the woman who ran the motel about it. She met Shannan, who came out a few minutes later and was crying and shaking, got in her cab, spent an hour with her talking. Everything that she was told matched Shannan's profile, that she had a mother, sisters, and a boyfriend, and that this man had contacted her through, I guess, Backpage, and I'm not sure if it was Backpage or one of the others, but had contacted her and had basically enticed her to come out because he was so very nice to her. And on the phone, he seemed like a very gentle fellow, and he was willing to say what he was going to do was help her family and her boyfriend, with money, I guess. And so Shannan came out, and he handed her in the room an envelope that was stuffed with what she thought was money, and he told her it was $1,000, put it on the night table, and told her that was for her and her family, no matter what happened that night. And then he was upset. He became very uptight, and he went in at one point to the bathroom. She looked in the envelope, and it was stuffed with papers, and she knew she was in trouble. So he came out, became very aggressive with her. She bolted into the bathroom, locked the door, called for a taxi to come and take her. And that's how the driver met Rex Heuermann from a distance, but saw him. Several days. Go ahead.
No, I didn't mean to interrupt. No, keep going. I'm sorry.
That's all right. Several days or weeks later, she wasn't clear and she wasn't sure. It's a long time ago. She gets another call, and this time to pick up somebody named Matt in a place in a location which was Ronkonkoma, in the middle of Long Island, or Bohemia, which is right next door to it. There are no clear lines drawn for those places. And she went to a bar, which was supposed to pick him up and take him to a destination. You have to picture that taxis in that area, it's a small area that we're talking about on Long Island. So the taxis that are servicing the railroad stations and the like in that area, there aren't too many. There's one or two, three companies apparently all owned by the same operation. I'm not even sure of that, but looks like it. And they service the area. So in this fairly confined area, she gets this call to pick up Matt. She goes to the location where it's a little side street with a bar on the right as you drive down the street, and on the left, a house with windows. And she pulls up and sees a girl in a window on the left, sees the bar on the right, and all of a sudden this huge creature rises up. She's not sure from where, but he comes to the car. He's dressed in a fatigue type jacket, an army fatigue, camouflage kind of a jacket. And he gets into the cab, and he's a giant, and he's angry. He's uptight. He leans on the chair there and leans forward anyway, and tells her that they're going for a long ride in the woods, and says with the girl who's in the window, which didn't make much sense to the driver, but because he changed the destination, the red flag went up. And so she said, I'm not going there. They got into an argument. And then when she said to him, do you talk to your mother that way? Because he was arrogant, was her word, and angry and agitated. And he shouted at her or bellowed at her, my mother's dead. And then he pulled a gun, a handgun, and he cocked the gun, basically. He slid the bolt. And she could hear that. And he said to her words to the effect that Just give me a reason to kill you. I already want to kill you.
Interesting.
And so what she does then is she says, I'm leaving the keys in the car. You can have the keys. You can have my wallet. You can have my money. Take anything you want. Just, leave me alone. And the dispatcher is saying over the radio, we hear you. We know what you're doing. Words to that effect, and get out of the car. So at that point, he does get out of the car. I guess he knew that he was being listened to and what have you. So he didn't shoot her. Instead, he gets out of the car. She drives away, starts the car and drives away. And as she's going up the road, here comes a police officer of Suffolk County in a marked car, but driving very slowly with his lights off. She waves him down, or however they meet, and she tells the police officer, there's one of yours back there. Seems like he's having a bad day, and he has a gun. The reason she says that is because in the conversation with the man who turns out to be Heuermann, he was wearing some kind of a lanyard with a placard on it that a policeman would wear, and she thought it was a policeman. So she said to him, are you a cop? And he said, yes. And she said, where? And he said, Brooklyn. So that caused her to tell the cop this story that I just mentioned. And then she drove away. She says she believes from the dispatcher that this man went into the woods and fired off 2 rounds in the woods. And that's the last she heard of him. She conjectures that, intelligently, I would say, that he was hunting her. He was looking for her, because it's very easy to call the cab company and say, look, I had this driver from 2 weeks ago. I liked her, or whatever. She's the only African-American driver and female driver at that time. And describe and say, I want her. I want her to pick me up again. And, that kind of thing can happen very easily. So she thought
Sure.
he was stalking her because she had been able to see him leaving the motel. There's no evidence that that's true by itself, but it's a good conjecture, and it doesn't hold us, but at least it's thoughtful. It's also equally as likely that it was a random moment, because if this guy's using cabs, there's not a lot of people who are going to be driving at night in the cab business who, it's fairly easy for it to be a coincidence. So we have those 2 factors in that case. But
Interesting.
very credible lady.
So, John, a couple of questions that come to my mind real fast is, the first contact, the gal's in the bathroom. She's obviously called, and it sounds like she's setting up a safety plan, i.e. the flashing lights, for the cabbie, so that she knows that's the one that she can make a break to. Was that your read on what was going on there when she was talking to the dispatcher about the cab showing up outside?
That's the read I would have that you have. We're stuck with the problem in all these kinds of cases. I'm sure you know this, but perhaps the audience needs to know that we have to work with evidence. And inference is a valuable tool, as is speculation, but they're not evidence. And we don't really know what triggered Shannan to call a taxi rather than the police, except that if she's working in the business, it's usually not wise to call the police, and she was kind of trapped. I think she didn't expect this guy to be the bad guy he was, because she had, qualified him beforehand. So, it's the best plan maybe at the moment she could think of, but we don't really know.
Yeah, no, it's and I worked Vice for 2 years in SoCal, so I know a lot of girls would have that, plan in place where they would run into the bathroom and try to pull something like this up if a John was going to go sideways and they had that gut feeling. And one other thing is, did you know that Backpage was taken over when they were taken down, their building was taken over, and you may want to write this down, by a group called Deliver Fund.
What?
And Deliver Fund,
Okay.
DE, and these are all ex. The guy who started is a guy named Nick, and he's a former CIA guy. And they actually took the building that Deliver Fund was in, and that's their headquarters now.
Well,
After taking them down, they may have some historical information. The reason I'm giving you their name. Okay, if
okay.
you look them up, you can call Nick and see if there's anything there. Which was my set. Go ahead.
That's important because the origin of the night that Shannan disappeared, the whole story does not make any sense if you believe the John she visited, Joseph Brewer. If you believe Pack, you can't believe either one of them. But whether you do or you don't, nothing makes sense about how this whole tryst occurred.
Sure.
There's huge gaps, and the police have not filled those gaps.
Okay. Okay, Gary, I know your mind's going 1,000 miles an hour. What say you so far?
Well, I just want to make sure I'm following something. So how many months before she disappears did this happen? Do we believe that this happened?
Several months, being she estimates it occurred somewhere. The incident with the motel occurred somewhere between October and December, up to the end of December. She's not sure where exactly it fits. She remembers that it wasn't warm out, and she places it in that year in the fall, but she doesn't have a more specific memory of when. Well, there are ways to corroborate that, and I'm sure the police are working on that.
Well, here's what fascinates me and disturbs me about this. To those of us who study men who commit serious sexual homicide, we know that what tends to happen is that, and the audience here will be pretty familiar with this, is that they tend to have a kind of a prototype, is what I call it, person that they're angry at, a group they're angry at, that where they want to level the playing field, so they go out and they find these surrogate victims that represent the person they're actually mad at, mom, women in general, whatever. And what happens is when they hone in on someone, that person has to fit a very specific mold. They have to either look a certain way or have a certain body type, or they have to. And what's so disturbing about this is that you get the sense that once he locked in on this person, it didn't matter how many months it took, she had to be one of the victims. Now, you could also say, well, maybe he had to get rid of her because she knew too much or she saw too much or whatever. But for people like us who study these kind of offenders, what you start thinking of is a person who honed in on a person, incorporated them into a fantasy, and it bothered him that he didn't get her that night. And it didn't matter how many months it took, she was going to die. And that is very haunting to me to think about. A lot of the things that are described in this story smack of a person who had a very particular fantasy and had probably through years of doing this over and over again, honed a lot of clever tricks for luring somebody to a particular location to create a false impression of what they were doing there. I think this is somebody who wanted people to willingly go there to wherever he was going to do his thing. And then the idea was to sort of change plans abruptly, take them somewhere else, like with the cab, take them somewhere else and do whatever it is he wanted to do. And I think part of the reason for that is, now, I agree with you, we have to be careful about speculation. But I can tell you from other, shall we say, members of this species that I have interviewed, that the idea seems to be for some of them that they are aroused by the idea that someone put themselves into the situation where they die. It's like a way of saying, you're a terrible woman who was engaging in these kinds of activities, and that's why you're garbage, and I'm going to do this to you, which has a lot to do with the way they feel about women or the particular woman they're angry at. Now, we don't know who that is. I can assure you he's mad at some woman in his life. We don't know who it is yet, if this is indeed Heuermann that did this. But what's also interesting is that fib about his mom. Now, lies from people like this are kind of like a Rorschach. They're going to work with their psyche when they lie. And the idea that he's menacing and threatening a woman in the back seat, and someone says, the thing about his mother, and he says, "My mother's dead," is very interesting, given that his mother's alive. It's very interesting because it starts to give you a clue about what he was transferring to that woman. That's who he's mad at. Now, I don't know what that's about. When we look at the history in Heuermann, we get the sense of somebody whose father died when he was pretty young. We don't know what it meant to be left with the mother that he had. But when you look at things like the kind of wife he had and the kind of women he's accused of killing, you start to get the sense of someone who thought of women in a very split way. They're either, my collaborator, or my, the one who takes care of me, or the woman who's on a pedestal, or the woman that's absolute trash, that I could destroy, which is not uncommon in these kinds of guys. And so I think what jumps out at me right away is the idea that he was so focused on this particular victim that it didn't matter how long it took, she had to go. And that starts to make me think that he stalked her. Those kind of people will stalk and know every move of a person that they have their eye on. Now, Chris, wouldn't you say from our experience that that's pretty typical? That when you've honed in on a victim, sometimes you've even broken into their house, sat outside their house in the car, stalked their family members, called their family members and hung up on them, followed them. I mean, what do you think about that, Chris? Because I would not be shocked at all.
Yeah, no, I agree with you 100%, Gary. And the fact that Shannan may have picked up on that, I mean, her gut. I mean, if she's hiding in the bathroom and making, these phone calls and then simultaneously creating an escape plan that she's comfortable with, that it again shows that she's trying to do the workaround, to your point, and these guys. And which leads us, that's a good segue into the phone call, the 911 call.
Right.
Tell us a little bit about that, John.
Well, first, do you mind if I just point out, from what Gary said, that
of course
we have a good modicum of evidence that Heuermann was a stalker. He stalked a fellow that he got into a fight with from the Long Island Railroad when he got off the railroad train in his commuter train. He called Melissa Barthelomew's sister and called her all kinds of names, filthy names after a while, and racist names and the like, and said some horrible things about how he killed her sister. And he has stalked other people. There's that little girl that he emerged out of a nature preserve in Massapequa Park and chased her around, or kept popping up on her pathway on her bicycle. And he was also, by the way, at that time wearing a camouflage jacket, just like the taxi driver mentioned. So there are similarities in his conduct, but he's stalked a number of people. He even stalked his own secretary onto a ship when she said, "Oh, you can't find me. I'll be 2 days out in the water in the middle of the ocean." He said, "No, I can find you." And in her second day out there, she received a note under her door saying, "See," and it was from him saying, "See, I know where you are," or words to that effect. So he enjoys stalking. That's a real thing that he does. And he seems also to enjoy hunting. He was a hunter, a duck hunter, as well as another hunter of other things. And he was also a member of the he was apparently a survivalist, because they found survivalist gear in his house when they did the inventory. I noticed it. So he was involved in all of that kind of thing that involves stalking and hunting and the like. And so, of course, that's all in this case, very much so. But as to the 911 call that you asked me to speak about, I think you have to really step back, and I think the police department themselves have to step back away from themselves and listen to that tape with fresh mind and fresh ears, because it starts to make a lot more sense what happened on that tape. It becomes sensible and not bizarre when you start to see it in light of who Heuermann was and who Dr. Hackett is and was, and the possible connection between the two. We've accused Peter Hackett of being responsible for the death of Shannan Gilbert, And we have a lawsuit pending in that respect. Peter Hackett ran a company called Survivalist Dynamics, and he ran it with another man from Long Island originally, who went to the Coast Guard Academy and was a cruise ship captain thereafter. But there aren't a lot of people who do that kind of thing. I mean, relative to the population, it's an arcane thing to do, an arcane hobby, shall we call it, to engage in. And so the chances are very strong when you have hobbyists like that who are devoted to a belief or a cause, that they're going to know one another. They're going to communicate with each other. So there is that possibility in this case. Still, it should occur, at least when you hear the 911 tapes, that Shannan Gilbert didn't necessarily start out being in Brewer's house and calling 911 in desperation when she was with Brewer, especially when you consider Brewer's testimony that he has given under oath that he was in the room with her when she called. And instead, there's a real chance that she had been outside and was chased into the house. Something to consider. Guaranteed? No, that's not guaranteed, but it's a theory or a surmise, perhaps one might say, an inference that needs to be glued together with the evidence. But in any event, for a working sex worker who has a driver to call 911 is exceedingly unusual. The girls in that business, and I've worked with many of them, especially once this case started 12 years ago, represented many of them. It's just not likely that they're going to call 911 unless they are in desperation.
Yeah, we call that DLR. It's called does not look right.
Okay.
And I had a caper years ago. Her name was Frederica, and everybody ignored her, but she called, and the patrol guys got there. They called me. I got there. I wrote her what we used to call an officer's report. It was called a 153, and I submitted it. Well, about 2 years later, there was a serial in San Diego County by the name of Porter, who was killing, workers, sex workers, and body dumping them. And it just so happened that he was the guy that was on that FI, in that report that I had written, and it came through Frederica. She told me that, hey, this guy tried to choke her and threw her out of he had a little MG at the time, and threw her out behind a bowling alley, and then was trying to get out on top of her and kill her. So to your point, you're 1,000% right. When these gals get to this place where it's just too much to handle from the street position, for them to call 911 is a really, really interesting dynamic in this particular case. Gary, what do you think about these kind of details like this coming up now?
Well, first of all, as Sherlock Holmes famously said, there's nothing more important than trifles. These little details I think, are where you start to get the meat of a case, the psychology of a person, and the way that everything had to be sort of perfectly orchestrated to get what he wanted, and nobody could slip through, because he was such a hunter and I think saw this as a kind of art. And I'm very haunted by the idea of the comment about taking the woman out to a forest. First of all, again, the hunting imagery makes it particularly disturbing that as part of the fantasy, he might want her out in the forest. God knows what he would have done out there. We know from other serial killers, for example, that some of them like to chase you through it, run after you with a gun in the dark. They love the thrill of hiding behind a tree and listening to you scream and that kind of thing. We don't know exactly what he would have done. But if he's anything like some of these other offenders, the idea was to create a situation where the woman's adrenaline is pumping and she's absolutely terrified, and then he sort of pops out and attacks. And so that's very disturbing. But it also makes me wonder why they're not digging up some of these forests looking for bodies. I know they've looked at beaches and so forth, but if we have a specific reference to the forest, why are law enforcement not, sending dogs in there and kind of looking? I mean, do you know, John? Are they looking at the forest for bodies? Because
There
sounds
hasn't.
suspicious to me.
They did. There
Good.
hasn't. There hasn't been a comprehensive new search of the forests, which are pretty large, Manorville and where the bodies were found. Some of them, that I don't think has occurred, but helicopters have been used for that sort of thing. And Suffolk County only had one cadaver dog that was being used that found the bodies initially. And one of the interesting questions is, why did they not search the Oak Beach marsh thoroughly first, instead searching Gilgo Beach, which is not connected. It's connected in a lengthy way, but she disappears in Oak Beach, not in Gilgo Beach. So that was an interesting thing, but I can't answer whether the police are still going to be digging up any more or looking for any more bodies in the marsh or in Manorville. Just don't know. But there's a labor problem here. I mean, this is such a huge endeavor, and it's grown in scope. It's grown in purpose, and the sex industry that's involved in, that's vast. The swingers clubs that are involved, it just keeps growing and growing. And I would think one of the challenging things for the task force is to have the number of people to chase down all the leads, much less to do the searching that would have to take place.
Right.
Yeah. So let's talk about that swingers situation. How did that? What information floated up on that involvement with the swingers club?
Well, another woman emerged and spoke to me at length, and she gave an affidavit, and that's the one I talked about, that the detectives qualified. And she was a swinger. She was not a sex worker, but she engaged in swinging, which seems to have been, probably still is, from what I understand, pretty popular amongst a segment of people that crosses economic lines, racial lines, and the like. So she had a detective friend from New York City, police officer friend, and they would go swinging at a place called La Trapeze on 27th Street in New York, which is a few blocks away from Heuermann's office. And it was a notorious place for switching couples. And it was also well known, apparently, to those three different individuals who have come forward to me to say, each of them not knowing one another, by the way, to say that the place had a substantial number of police in there who were swingers. And they'd switch, and they have these rooms they would go in. There was a big room where everybody kind of collectively got into sex with one another. They even served food there. I mean, I don't know if I'd want to eat that food, but this was the club. And she says that she and her boyfriend arranged from that club to go to Massapequa Park. She remembered that in particular, to Heuermann's house to have a swinging party, as it were.
At his house? At his house?
Yes, at his house in Massapequa Park. And so they drove out to Massapequa Park, the detective and his girlfriend, who was this lady, the witness who came forward. And they brought with them a third person who she believes to be Karen Vergata, one of the victims. And Karen Vergata had, she looked dirty and homeless, basically hungry, and they took her with them. The mysterious part of that first impression was, why would they bring her to this party? And our witness doesn't know exactly how the detective acquired her, but they were going to this party, our witness says, on or around St. Valentine's Day. And they would ordinarily go out to swing parties for celebratory days like that, including, say, Halloween. And so she remembered that she went there in February. And this was in 1996. And this girl, when we checked out her records, she had been in jail, Vergata, until Valentine's Day, I believe. And she called around. We're not sure who she called. We believe she called her father. But she got released from jail on that day. And so Vergata goes with them, whatever day it turns out to be. And one of the distinguishing details, like Gary just mentioned, and that, that become important, is that the girl sits in the back seat and she's bent over forward and to one side in a very odd position. And then it turned out that, unbeknownst to the witness, Karen had been in a car accident and that had disfigured her spine to some degree. And so the description that this woman gave of the odd behavior of Vergata in the back seat, of Karen in the back seat, matches that. So when they get there, you still wonder, why did they bring along a third party? There's a couples that was supposed to, switch normally. Excuse me. And it was unclear. The witness herself wasn't sure why he brought her. But we just learned a very interesting fact on another podcast where the lawyer for Åsa Ellerup in her divorce is a fellow named Robert Macedonio. I know Bob for many years. And he appeared on the tape, on the pod, to say that, Mrs. Ellerup would never have done these things. It's obvious that she would never have done these things because she was pregnant at the time in February of 1996. So she wouldn't have done this. Well, I thank Mr. Macedonio for his representation. Maybe he should be sticking to the divorce and not going further. But because now what we know is that there's a perfectly good explanation for why the third person was brought along. And that's because to switch, you need couples. And the detective needed somebody else to do the switching besides Mrs. Ellerup, because she wouldn't do it because she was pregnant. Now, you can still have sex when you're pregnant. We all know that. But it comes right from the horse's mouth. Mrs. Ellerup's lawyer, that she didn't want to have sex because she was pregnant, which is also very often for a lot of women, that's the case.
Mm-hmm.
So we have this third person. Now it makes sense that she's brought along. And we also have the witness's testimony that when she got there, she offered Mrs. Ellerup sex, and Mrs. Ellerup turned it down. Now you know why. From the mouth of Mrs. Ellerup's lawyer himself. Okay? So these little details, they become important. And it explains what happened that night. The rest of the story is that Mr. Heuermann was downstairs or in another room, and the detective boyfriend went to disappeared. And our witness says that, as often happens in these situations, in these couple switchings, the men start to become interested in broader sex, not just, switching, but so now they want men too. And she believed, and she was offended because he disappeared for so long. She believed that her boyfriend went and had sex with Heuermann. And she eventually ends up having sex with Heuermann herself, but she puts that in the mix. So as far as what happened to Karen, when they're leaving, and this is very early in the morning hours, after Heuermann goes out into the backyard and in a big canister starts a fire, which upsets our client enough, or not client, but rather she's a witness, which upsets the witness enough that she says, why is he doing that? He's going to attract police attention with a big fire. And they left right after that. When she's leaving, she tells the boyfriend, hey, what about the girl? And the girl is in the window looking out at them. And she's upset because the girl looks upset. And the boyfriend says words to the effect of, don't worry, she's taken care of. It's okay. They're just playing a game. With that, the girl comes running out of the house naked and goes in front of the garage. And you can see the garage in the picture. And I don't know where she ends up, but the witness says, she asks again, what are we doing? Why are we not helping this girl? And she's told by the driver, the detective, don't worry, they're just playing a game. Everything is fine. Another interesting detail that she gives us is that when she came to the house, she was in the detective's car. When they leave the house, they leave in a different vehicle, what she thought was an SUV, which led her to believe that her boyfriend and Heuermann knew each other beforehand, that they were friends or in some way connected to one another in order to be able to switch cars. Interesting detail.
Fascinating detail. Are the detectives that we're talking about, what agency are they with at the time, if we know?
The detectives work for New York City.
Okay, so they're NYPD.
Yes.
Okay. And, I want to differentiate that, right, from the island versus the city.
Well,
right?
the people that were in the club in La Trapeze, according to the three witnesses I talked to, all said that there were a considerable number of people from Long Island and that there were a large contingent of police officers. So you can put those two facts together. They may not all have been from one police department.
Okay, so there could be multiple guys attending and gals. It sounds like both husband and wives, or was that uncommon?
It could be husband and wives, as long as you had a partner. And what I learned was that some of these men would hire sex workers to come with them so that they would have a partner. You were not allowed in the club unless you came with a partner, and you also had to leave the club with the same partner, and they wouldn't let you leave if you didn't. And there were rapes in that club. There were assaults, none of which ever got followed up because, according to my witnesses, there were too many policemen involved there. So it all got buried.
Interesting. Gary, what do you think? Where are you going?
I just keep thinking about the woman running naked and the other victim running into the bathroom, and I find myself wondering if that was all permitted as part of the thrill for him. There are other men who commit serial sexual homicide who will give a victim the false impression that they've been allowed to run to make the hunt more exciting. The idea being, oh, you think you slipped away from me, you think you ran into the bathroom, you got away, but it's all part of getting the adrenaline up and giving a false impression of hope and all of that. So this is deeply disturbing to me. Even the idea that she's completely naked and she runs and everything, you really start to get the picture of a deeply disturbing series of events. And I think, to me, I just think this guy is such a control freak that I wouldn't think of things like that as happening because he screwed up. I would think of everything as orchestrated for maximum psychosexual thrill. And I think you're exactly right, John, that he's a hunter. And, it reminds me of the Zodiac killer, who in one of his codes said, I like killing people because it's so much fun. It's more fun than hunting wild game in the forest because man is the most dangerous animal of all. And I think that is precisely the thrill for that type of a person. And I also think, based on his life, that he's somebody who would never let go of a grudge. There was a story that I read about a woman who dared to leave the job, where he was working in, actually right near my office, in Manhattan on Fifth Avenue. She dared to leave and go work for another firm. And the story that I read, was that he showed up underneath her window. And there were rumors, in the office about his arsenal of guns. and everybody was, it was totally terrifying, that this guy would show up underneath the window. I mean, that's the story as I understand it. We also know, I mean, if they are to be believed, there are these stories that emerged about sex workers that he would fly in from other states and go out on dates with. And on those dates would have extremely uncomfortable conversation like, who's your favorite serial killer? Let me tell you who mine is. I'm really interested in that Gilgo case. What do you think about it? What do you think was the reason he did this to the, left the bodies like that? And in those cases, if those women who he went on those dates with supposedly are telling the truth, again, you had that idea that he wanted you to willingly go. He wanted them he would ask them, are you interested in bondage? Are you interested in and the idea was to sort of get them to say, yeah, I'd do that, go with them somewhere. And obviously, once they're in a secure location, he would probably then begin to do things that were more consistent with the aim of killing them or torturing them in some way. And so, it's just terrifying to me that we have a woman who made this phone call. For example, Shannan makes this phone call. Why do we not know what he did to her with all those months? Did she not tell anyone what this guy had done to her? It must have been something that he did, chasing her around. Did he threaten to strangle her? Did he pull out rope? What did he do? And why would she not have confided it to anybody? Would she not have trusted people? Did she tell people? Have you questioned anyone who said, yeah, in those months that she was still alive, she spoke about this extremely terrifying experience? Because that would tell us a very great deal about his MO and what on earth was necessary for him, the signature elements, what was psychologically needed for him. But I think we have to figure out why he is so angry at women, why it is that he wants them to degrade themselves, why he gets off on the idea of them trying to run away from him and him being able to catch them no matter what. That sounds like getting even for rejection. And so I think the psychology of him starts to leap out from these stories, and that's why I believe these stories. I think they entirely match what I mean, it's not only that they tally in the way that you're talking about in terms of evidence, but they also smack of the kind of stories that we hear from people who have encountered sexually sadistic people. Chris, don't they have the ring of truth to you also of people?
Yeah, I think the most interesting thing,
yeah,
listening to John and what these witnesses are saying, is let's just take, for an example, the swingers club and the cops.
right.
Let's hypothesize and put them all in there. This is all, what I'm curious if he wasn't using that as a high cover in relationship to the first contact to his victimology. That he gets the cops there. He's got all his buddies. It goes back to the first contact from the cab driver. Hey, one of your guys is having a bad night out here. With the badge thing. The shield over his neck there, right? But if you think about, is he using this to just kind of qualify his victims, all these sex parties?
Well, you have to remember, or consider, rather, is a better word, that that this guy is also, he seems to be a serial joiner. He's involved in several different organizations and groups. He's very gregarious at these group meetings that he has, with architects and the like. But he joins, and he's also someone who's looking at really dark, really wicked child porn and at snuff films, as we've heard already. We know that from the police. So those kind of people tend to, they're loners, but many of them, but they also tend, in my experience, to join groups with each other, not formally, sometimes even that secretly, but they form relationships with other people of like kind, and they meet them, they fly out to meet them, they rate girls. There was an organization where they actually rated girls and their performances. So this guy is a big joiner, and the information I have, the new information I have, very much conforms with my original suggestion that what's going on here is there's a great big sewage of these people who were involved in switchies and meeting men up on the hill and having sex with them in the woods and up in Farmingville, and going to sex parties with lots of coke, the wet and wild girls out on the boats. There's a whole panoply of these people. They come from organizational places like the police department, teachers, bankers, restaurateurs. They're the crust of respectability over the real sewage that's beneath. And it's in that sewage atmosphere that Rex operates. And so when you start looking at these cases, you have to look at the broader picture, and the broader
Right.
picture is emerging as we speak. For example, we now know that we found out that there was a swingers club on Long Island, not just in New York. And that swingers club was, and there's a record of it.
No, I agree with you 100%.
The same people.
I agree with you 100%. But what I want you to do is step back for a second to 1996. Okay? In 1996, the internet was 1 year old. Okay, it came out in 93. The first photograph that was ever transported across the outer space was 1995. Okay? And so in 1996, they were still working off of beepers. Okay. Right. And they were working off of, these new chat rooms like AOL, like Yahoo, and all of these things that started to develop. And by the way, this was my expertise. I actually did research on this. Okay. And so now pushing forward, where I was going with this, and I agree with you, is his early development. And I was curious what Gary was thinking too. His early development in the mid 90s, hypothetically, if he's attending these types of clubs and the cops are attending these types of clubs, remember, this is the secret life that's taking place here. It's not the public or the private persona. This is a secret life that's going on. During the day, they may be pushing a squad car or a detective somewhere, but at night, they're living this double life that is now manifesting itself through sexual fantasy, which is extremely dangerous. So I'm more curious as he starts to evolve. If he's involved in it at that time and he has this cover play, i.e. all of his friends, to your point, he's a joiner, and they're cops or whoever, socialites, and he's able to mingle into that environment, but he's going to have to stand out at some point to dispel his fuel, exercise his fantasy, and into the homicides that he's right now being charged with. So he has to separate himself. So my curiosity was back to this idea of, is he using those initial setups and introductions to kind of feel out his victimology, and then at some point he gets comfortable enough to where his stalking kicks in, and now he's on the hunt. Gary, what do you think? Are you tracking me, Gary, where I was headed?
Yeah, I think what this is one of the things I had said on the Court TV appearance, which John Ray and I were on together, is that I think the idea was that was the pool in which he was searching for people, and it gave a kind of a cover to the process of taking women home. Because there were people involved that could also get in trouble, according to the way you're describing it, they would help him cover it up, hide that people were being there. It created a fantastically easy scenario into which a person fueled by sexual fantasy, was able to bring people to isolated places, but then probably do something that the people in those circles did not know he was doing beyond those experiences. So that my guess is, like, for example, there's this question of how much did his wife know? I mean, I don't know, who knows? But what one possibility is that she knew about some aberrant sexual practices, but probably didn't know that they were being killed, if he is guilty. So that I think, that's just one more paraphilia, one more kind of sexual perversion that this guy might have had, on top of kind of being closer to normal people in his on the spectrum of being experimental, sexually doing things that millions of people do, but he just sort of, he goes over the edge into serial sexual homicide, I think. And I wouldn't be shocked if it turned out that it started out for him as being interested, for example, in bondage or looking, peeping or doing something like that. And then it wasn't enough for him. He gets, he starts escalating, as we'd say in the business. With a lot of those guys, the first murder is an accident. They're with a prostitute, they're choking her, they have her tied up, they have whatever, and she, and something happens and she dies, and then they experience extreme orgasm or extreme arousal. So then they start saying, well, that'll be the end in and of itself. It's the killing that'll make this extremely exciting. So my guess is that he was interested in these kind of off the beaten path sexual activities, and they just weren't enough. Each one he needed a little bit more, until he winds up like a classic serial killer, discovering that it requires homicide to be ultimately aroused. Of course, this is all speculation, but that is the way they tend to move. Yeah, what's up, Chris?
No, which leans more towards credibility than of these witnesses that John's been talking about,
Exactly.
who've come forward years later and saying, look, because if you think about what is being discussed here potentially, if we think about, okay, if there's this other dynamic, i.e. those who are supposed to protect us potentially involved in this, other problem going on here, this other world. And then we have these other people involved in that world, i.e. sex workers and, victims, such as Shannan and others who are no longer with us. At somewhere in the middle here, we now have these witnesses that are coming forward saying, hey, I saw that guy, let's use the cab driver for an example. I saw that guy way back when. He is the same guy. And I do remember this story of, what had taken place on a certain night and what John had explained here. I think that lends credibility to her call, to me as an investigator. I think, okay, well, why is she just pulling this out of the thin air here? Okay, that doesn't, either it's going to be right or it's going to be wrong. It's kind of like, to use one, the old John, you'll appreciate this, sir, where, the old, the footprints coming from the pool in the mid-afternoon, but you can't see, right, anybody there, right? Was it the magic foot, stamp that made it on the pool deck, or did somebody actually get out of the water? And so there's this inference that, hey, there may be something going here, which leads me into thinking about the truthfulness of these individuals. They're taking a big chance if in fact they had information that night and there are Ellie involved, and there is Ellie involvement at a level that I can't comprehend at this point because we don't have all the facts. Okay. But if they're believable, which it sounds like they are, they've put their name to it. And when you start looking at the other big picture, to your point of what more is going to be coming, I think you've got to go back and you've got to start at those 1996 contacts.
Contacts go back before that with the new evidence I have. They do. They go back before that. And so his heyday isn't necessarily, 2010. It stretches quite a ways back. We know, at least I know that much. So also there's some common behaviors that you both keep talking about that are characteristic of these kinds of people. And they're in this case for sure, not only in the way I've told you, but also we have 3 different victims, each of whom say that they were confronted by a very agitated, angry man who got himself worked up into a fury right away and had a handgun in all 3 cases. There are the various things of that nature that lend this credibility, but there's also a plethora of evidence that there's more than just Heuermann himself involved in some way, not necessarily in the actual murder or murders, maybe so too, but are involved in some way in his illicit activities that are sexual in nature, and that cannot be avoided here, and that includes his wife. I have one witness who says that she was there. Two witnesses actually who say she was there in the house when he was having sex with sex workers downstairs, and they're very credible, both of them, and they don't know each other when they came forward with this kind of evidence. And one of them said that he would pay he'd pay extra, and he was profligate with his money in paying for these girls, and who knows whether he also had men in it, but he would pay, sometimes lining them up two at a time, sometimes 2 on 1, but he liked to pay for extra for what's called bareback in the business, and that means no condom. He would pay extra to have that. Now, that could mean, in light of what Gary was saying, the hatred of women could arise from having caught an STD. We've seen that happen. That's a possibility. It's speculation at this point, but it's possibly in the mix. But he has these other reaches into other areas, all dealing with sex. Think about Burke, Chief of Police Burke, and suddenly it emerges that his involvement, we knew he was always involved with sex workers. I represented one of them, the main one that he was involved with. But over the course of years, I always thought he was just, sick when it came to girls, but it turns out it was also men. And so does that connect Burke with with the element that Rex was running around in the same group of people? It's possible. It's a thought, something to look into.
It certainly is interesting, Gary.
Oh, I'm sorry. I was just going to say, I think
remember, it's a family show too.
Yes, I know. I think that the bareback.
Did I overstep? I hope I didn't. I'm sorry if I.
No,
I
you're
think
fine.
he's warning me not to.
You're fine. I know where he's going.
Clearly, I'll speak in code, but I think that the not wanting to wear a condom is very reminiscent of what a lot of these guys say when you ask them why they didn't wear gloves when they commit crimes like strangling people and so forth, and they talk about the sensory experience of what they're doing being extremely important to them. You have to remember that these types of people are all about maximization of thrill and that risk taking. Doing something where you could leave prints or that you could leave DNA and so forth adds to the excitement. There's also this sad quality of, in a coded way, saying, who cares if you get pregnant? You're not going to be here anymore. That kind of thing. There's also this quality of like, we don't really have to worry about that. You'll be dead. And, so that, and then you think about, for example, there are some offenders who might say, if I don't wear a condom, the person is less likely to think I'm going to do anything horrible to them, because they might think that a criminal would wear something that would protect them or keep DNA back or so forth. There are all kinds of reasons, but I'm sure there's a reason for it that has something to do with psychosexual fantasy for this individual. I think that's the key to him, that everything was done for psychosexual reasons. What do you think, Chris? It smacks of that of somebody who was motivated by sexual arousal that involves cruelty.
Yeah, and what bothers me to the core is the fact that law enforcement's even coming up in this depth of these conversations. And I know that, for years, these cases, these poor victims' families have been just pushing the wall to get something done. And now finally, they get something done after restructuring that law enforcement, what it looked like at that time, right? New DA, new everything, a new team, new homicide task force. They all come in, fresh eyes, as we used to call it, right? And this is why the Cold Case Foundation exists. I mean, and, I'm working I got 4 cases right now, across the country. I can't talk about them, but, it's because of fresh eyes. And what it would not surprise me, and I'm being 100% frank here, if a couple of cops aren't hooked up into this thing somewhere, and they need to be taken off the street or at least identified, and they need to be hooked up just like the next guy. if they're involved in it. That's where the evidence takes you. And I'm hoping that this task force, and I'm pretty sure they are based on what we've seen already, the results that we're seeing, they're going to take a hard look at some of their own. And if that's the case, so be it. Because one of the things that really bothered me when I heard the 911 call is she creates this plural conversation with inside the 911 call. John, can you tell us a little bit more about that 911 call that was made?
Yeah. When she makes the call, the very first thing she says, and she has to say it 3 times because she's whispering or attempting to keep quiet what she's saying, is someone is after me. Someone is after me. Somebody's after me. And that's one person. And it can't be Brewer because Brewer's in the room with her when she makes this call or when she's on that call. So it's somebody else. And yet then we hear her saying, they are trying to kill me. They. She repeats that several times. So that's plural. So, you could imagine if you want to that they is Brewer and Pack, but that doesn't make a whole heck of a lot of sense. Even given that she suspects that Pack is part of the scheme that's going on, and she says so, because the scheme to her is greater than Pack. So when she's saying they are trying to kill me, she's referring to some other people. If you listen to the tape, that's as clear as a bell.
Yeah, it's as clear as a bell.
So what people are we talking about? If she's being chased by someone, is there a hunting group outside? Is there something that she participated in with the group that that scared the hell out of her? Who knows? Except we do know that she says, I never done it before and I'll never do it again.
Right.
One can imagine that, well, she's talking about a drug that she did, but there's no evidence that she's on any drug whatsoever. And her conversation throughout that tape is not only, give and take, rational, but it's also polite. And people who are stoned out of their minds, hallucinating and being disoriented, they're not like that. They don't speak like that. They're not polite. They're not nice. And she was at all times. And she tried to explain herself. So there is some group of people outside of that house or even inside the house in another place, but I would suspect more likely outside that house, with whom she had some contact and from whom somebody was chasing her and about whom she was fearful. And there are other portions of the tape that confirm what I have just told you, but it would take a while to discuss the 23-minute tape.
But isn't it possible that there was a group that was involved in some of these sexual practices, but he, the accused, is the only one who was going to go over the edge into homicide, but she didn't understand that he had different intentions than the rest of the pack that was just there for sexual activity? I mean, isn't it possible that she just thought, if the whole group is interested in the sexual stuff, the whole group's interested in killing me? But I think the whole point is that he was concealing himself within that pack. He's a pack hunter, I guess, concealing himself in that pack with intentions that were a little more than everybody else. And if you think about it, it reminds me very much of what we hear from serial killers who work in teams, where now that they've created an intimacy with each other, the idea is to say, well, you can't rat on me without your own demise. You'll get in legal trouble for saying you were here. So it's a fantastic cover. And even if it ever comes out that, that the whole group of you were out there with a person and then the person winds up dead, well, how can you prove which one of the people was the one who did it? We were all out there together. There were all different suspects that were out there with this person. So that it seems to me that all of these things would have been meticulously planned out by this guy. I also think from a psychological perspective, what's very interesting about him seems to be this theme of corrupting authority figures, whether it's police by accusation, the relationship with his wife, etc., where the idea seems to be this cynical idea that everybody has their price, everybody could be made cheap, everybody could be corrupt, And I don't know how that ties in, but the psychotherapist in me, it sets my ears, it perks my ears up, because it gives the sense of a person who feels that at the end of the day, people who present in the world as nice, loving, trustworthy authority figures secretly have a dirty underbelly, that they all have a price. They could all be corrupt. They could all be ruined. I also think psychologically, what's interesting about this as I'm listening to this whole conversation is, serial killers, which is of course what he's accused of being. We have to remember he's still just accused. They like to do these things that sort of poetically right a wrong in their mind, that poetically overturn a narrative, right? And this is a guy who I think felt incredibly invisible. He was huge and people mocked him and so forth, but I think the whole point was he didn't feel likable, ugly, let's say, that kind of thing. And I think the point is to take that invisibility and use it as a superpower. So now I can slither underneath you like a serpent and you don't see me. Here I am, 6'6", almost 250 pounds, and I can slither without your... So the whole idea is to take that weakness and sort of get aroused by the idea that now you can use it as a strength. And and that's the thing that I think we want to bear in mind with this guy is, I think, invisibility, anger at women, cynicism at figures of authority that failed him probably. They all come together, to kind of suggest a person whose issues started in his attachments in his childhood, and we don't know what those are yet. But I have no doubt that it's all going to come together so that one day people say that doctor was right when he said that comment, my father is dead, had meaning, and I'm sure it did.
You know what's going to be interesting as well, Gary and John, to think about, if let's go back to 96 and maybe even pre-96, right? I mean, without getting into his childhood where, Dr. Gary, I mean, he's the rock. He knows what we're anything of more than anybody. But let's just fast forward to, he's got his architectural business going, and now he's into this swinger scene, right? Where he's into the clubs and he's in where, the cops are going, maybe with their wives, etc. I don't know the whole extent of it, so I'm just, presupposing other cops had their wives there as well, right? I mean, it's a swingers club. That's what they do. Okay. And typically they're mostly married couples. If I understood you correctly. I mean, there could be some boyfriend, girlfriend stuff going on there, but in the early, 96, 90, and during that time, and even back into the 80s, it was, one of those, taboo things that you just kind of, they would keep to themselves. And I only know that because like I mentioned, I was a vice detective. But that said, I'm curious if any of those guys, if he did any architectural work for them.
We've been tracing that. I've been I and my helpers, who are really good volunteers, we've been tracing that. We've been working hard on that, and we've made certain synapses of that. So in that regard, snap together some pieces of evidence. Not enough to make a difference yet. I don't know how hard the police are working on that, one way or the other. But that's an interesting question, that there's a connection. Listen, there's a connection in a very general sense, shall I say, where he worked on buildings for the Roman Catholic Church, for Catholic charities, of which he was a donor, for which he was a donor and a member of some of these Catholic organizations, which were also suffused with Father Roboto and Father Placa, Monsignor Placa and Roboto, who had real sexual problems, so much so with children that in Roboto's case, he's one of the reasons why the Diocese of Rockville Center for the Roman Catholic Church is now bankrupt, because of the lawsuits brought because of him. And Heuermann's connection with them is real. They all were from the same parish in Massapequa Park. And we were able to find out that the neighbor to Brewer, and Brewer finally admitted this, his next door neighbor, whose door was knocked on by Shannan the night she fled, was Monsignor Plaka, who's involved in all these difficulties with the Catholic Church. And Heuermann did all this architectural work for the Catholic Church. There are synapses. How much they matter, I don't really know yet.
Sure, John.
Well,
Sure.
I've been thinking a lot about the fact that part of the prototype for this guy, if he is guilty, is that these women seem to have needed to be very petite. And part of me wonders if that was a way of satisfying, shall we say, an attraction to much younger people that would not have been something you could get away with. But we know from pornography searches that he was certainly aroused, not only by children, but by children being injured, like 10-year-old with a black eye and things like that. And so I think we always want to think about the question of, that this guy, did he have any actual minor victims, or did he just sort of substitute very small women to kind of play that out? Chris is actually an authority on child crimes. Chris, have you seen that before? People who use very tiny adults as a substitute for pedophilic strivings, or what?
Yeah, absolutely, Doc. I mean, and which causes us to go into the victim risk continuum, right? And what John's given us here, and I love your style, John. You are a bulldog. There is no question in my mind. Okay, if I was ever in trouble, I'm picking up the phone. You're a bulldog up here in the mind of these guys. But I'll tell you what, if I ever got in trouble, I'm calling John Ray if I'm in the city. That's for sure. That's happening. But what I keep going back to this, to your point, Gary, I keep going back to this thought process of is he shifting, his victimology, from petite girls and then kind of playing that out, and then we look at the dolls and all that other stuff that's coming out of his house. Does he have do you know anything about the interior of his house, John? We would be really interested in any information you may or may not have.
Yeah, some of the witnesses have told me what they saw on the inside of the house, and it's not much different than what you saw on TV. So, of course, one of the original questions I had were these women deriving their information from the TV rather than from actual experience? And I had to try to differentiate and make sure that wasn't the case,
Sure.
to differentiate the evidence and so forth. But I'm reasonably convinced that they weren't doing that their memories, although, weakened 27 years ago, that such a thing happened, that their memories would be imperfect about what they saw. But one thing that we do know, that the swinger witness says, is that when she was inside on the main floor, there seemed to be a back room, and there was, of course, a downstairs, and that the Christmas tree was still up, and it was February, and that bothered the witness, and she said, "Why do you still have up a Christmas tree?" She was questioning Mrs. Ellerup about that, and hadn't been taken down yet, which, by the way, conforms with the clutter bug aspect of the Heuermann house, that things were all cluttered and according to one witness, put in their place, but way too much clutter. That things, and if you look at the exterior of the house, if you imagine the interior was in a similar condition, it was a mess. And so the Christmas.
And Dr. Brucato called that. Yeah, Dr. Brucato called that. I mean, months ago. Gary, remember what you said about that, and what's the correlation to that psychologically?
You mean about that the house would be messy?
Yeah, and connecting to his mom and dad.
Oh yes, we talked about. I had a hypothesis about this guy. I think is being borne out, that he operates very much like a person who how shall we say, is stuck, arrested at a very particular time in his life because of a traumatic death. My hypothesis was that this is somebody who can't let go of things. whether they're grudges, whether they're deaths, whether they're etc. I think the death of his father was probably a very activating event for him. It happened right at the crossover into puberty. And my very strong sense is that this is a person who came to associate sexual desire with aggression that was related to the idea of making people permanent, fixing them where you needed them to be, tying them down, pinning them, whatever. Because the whole idea is you then take control over when people die, that they don't die on you. You're the arbiter of who lives and dies. I think he got sort of frozen in time. It's also interesting that those child victims are not very different in age, on the internet, we're not very different in age than around when he would have lost the father. I think he was sort of fixated on that time. And people like that, they can't move past the death of a person. You start to see interesting little things that they do when they commit crime. Like, for example, there's this question of whether he used his father's belt to bind one of the victims with the father's initials on it, that kind of thing. You get the sense of a person who couldn't introject his father and live up to the men, and people like that, they're frozen. So you see, it's not surprising, for example, that he would leave that house like a shrine, without anything being thrown out. Everything is just, it's like stuck. And I think that's exactly what happened to him. The key for me is going to be to find out what being left with his mother meant. I don't know what that meant, but that seems to have something to do with it. In the case of serial killers like this, one of two things happened. Either they got stuck with a mother who was on the outside looked like a good person, but was secretly abusive or condescending or whatever, so that you have a mixed up idea that women are either up here or down here, or they have a mother who's very kind to them, very loving, but then they go out into the world and the women in the world reject them. And they're angry at her that she fooled them, that they were an attractive guy and a lovable guy. And now the women out there are making fun of me, right? So you get that kind of thing. But to me, Chris, what you're picking up on is that being frozen, not being able to move past that death, I think. And all of this psychology will start to come out, and you'll start to see, I'm sure, as time goes on, that there's a lot of the common elements, because a person does not start engaging in serial sexual homicide for no reason. No matter how much people want to tell you that people are born that way, yes, it's true. They may have certain aberrant brain structures, but conspicuously, you can only count on a couple of hands men who commit serious sexual homicide that come from normal homes. They're usually abused. There are objects in their life that are unstable, that die on them, that abuse them, who drink, who use drugs. So I think that's where this story is going to lie. It is interesting that he can form alliances with people, but they're perverse. Getting involved with them to commit crime together, having an allegiance with a wife that may have engaged in some of these activities, the sexual activities with him that were a big secret. He can form alliances, but then he becomes furious at people if they dare to leave. Again, you have that theme, right? So like the woman who tried to leave the job, that kind of thing. So that I also think what you see in these kind of people psychologically is a need to collect the victims in one place where you can go and visit them because they are yours forever, right? That kind of thing. I personally think that given that the average one of these offenders starts at about 27 and never really stops, that's the average for these guys. They never really stop. It's very hard for me to believe that there wouldn't be a few stockpiles of bodies around in different places. That would make him like everyone else who does this. If it turns out that it was limited to just a few victims over that much time, he would be an anomaly. Chris, wouldn't you say that would make him very unusual in the annals of crime if he really only had that few victims?
Yeah, I agree with you 100%. I think they
Yeah.
need to get down to South Carolina. I think you'll search that property down there. There's probably stuff in Vegas that needs to be dug into a little bit deeper. And one other thing, Gary, you forgot to mention a while ago, I don't know if you recall it, but you talked also about the structure of just his career, the fact that he's an architect and that, buildings are bolted down, in corners and stuff. And so it's kind of like this, if I remember right, it's this idea of he's got all of this external projection of control.
Yes.
And you had said, though, that his crime scenes, though, would be frenzied, yet controlled, meaning the belt. But we would see a lot more of his unraveling during
I
the
know.
commission of the crime.
Talking about that, I said that even though there would be an outward projection of control that is inside life, that if you were to visit his home, it would be chaotic because
Yes.
that's all an outward projection, but then you get the real story, right? That you get the real inside story of this person being kind of a little bit odd and a little chaotic and a little obsessive and and so forth. And I think that's true. The kind of person who would like keep all the bad stuff in a vault, in a box. If you could just get in there, you'd see the truth, right? And I think that's the way you want to think about him, was that he had that secret life that was compartmentalized, and then there was this false intimacy that a person could be brought into, but only some people went into the darkness, into that little box. And I think he would flirt with that. Remember, there was a story, for example, about him inviting a female coworker over the house, supposedly to take measurements, I think, to possibly renovate the house. And the story is that he's tapping on the door of the vault, going, "You're not allowed in here," right? Which I think is exactly the kind of flirtation with the dark, letting somebody into the darkness you would see in that kind of person. And I think once that was unleashed on you, it was going to destroy you. He would not rest. That's the kind of guy that he would have a grudge forever until you were dead, and you were his, and then you went into the pile, and everything would be controlled. I agree with you, Chris. Control is the key for him. That's true.
Control that you're talking about, I think it transfers in a different way at his home. I surmise that it's his wife who was the clutterbug, and according to one of my witnesses, his clothing and the way he kept his goods, his clothing and things that were his in the downstairs part when they were having relations was very neat. He was overly neat, yet the house wasn't.
I see.
That it's his wife who is probably, which he probably didn't like very much. My guess is, but that's what we have in a form of one witness telling me that, who had been there. However, another thing you should note, I think Chris mentioned, was is to look in other places. There's a site on the internet called Murder Inc. And the code name guy is Rainbow, who runs that site. This guy is brilliant, and he has traced down a huge number of unsolved murders, all within a very small area in the state of Virginia. And at the center of that area is Rex's, one of his mother or his grandmother's home, I forget which he would visit in Virginia. And in fact, I think he admitted at one point that he would travel with his wife to Virginia. So that needs to be looked at. And if you look at that site, that guy really makes some pretty convincing arguments that those murders could be related. I don't know if they are or not, but it's worth looking into. I think this guy is all over the place. He's reckless. The idea of risk that you mentioned, it's miraculous that he didn't get caught earlier, because he is reckless. He leaves behind the belt, for example. You can see that he's sanitizing the bodies from evidence, because there's only four hairs that are found in the tapes of the bodies of the 3 that are found. So, somebody's cleaning that up, because there'd be more than 4 hairs if somebody wasn't watching carefully the number of hairs that would be available. There's 3 hairs all by the wife and 1 hair by Rex. It's an interesting problem.
But that makes John, the door of the vault interesting, right? Because it's this kind of idea of like teasing that you get aroused by the idea that you come so close to getting caught, and you're still invisible. even making it that obvious, they still can't catch you. You know, wouldn't you say, Chris? It's a kind of a way of needling that people are too stupid to catch you. That
Yeah,
reminds you of like the black cat in Edgar Allan Poe, right? When he's hitting on the wall where he's got his wife buried.
yeah, it's the, hopefully the cops prescribe the medicine before they get a diagnosis, right? And he's hoping that everybody around him, and for year, and he got away with it. We got to say that right up front for years. I mean, they now have him, but for all those years he was watching, the diagnosis without a prescription and going, okay, well, they're not there. And to your point, Gary, that's exactly what's going on when he taps on that vault. But I think also more importantly, to dovetail into what you're thinking, I want to keep going back to this 1996 contact, because at that time, technology wasn't as far advanced as it was. So that's where you're going to have most of your information, believe it or not. I know this sounds crazy, but that's where the majority of your information, John, for your team, it's going to be sitting in those early mid years. I mean, he may have killed before that. We don't know that, but it's a high probability that through his development that it's already he's already in the game. And the cop stuff becomes it's kind of like when a suspect interjects themselves into an investigation. Okay, well, what better way to interject yourself into an investigation if you got swinger friend cops just like you, okay, and you get an opportunity not only to engage in the sadistic, sexual side of the weirdness behavior, but hey, well, we got to have a couple of drinks together, and hey, what do you hear about what's going on? Just it's exactly like tapping the vault. You can't go in here, okay? But what he's doing is he's tapping the vault, opening the door, and listening to get into the play. So I'm curious if they got any taxi tickets. Back then, remember, everything was written down. If you got a cab, man, you're getting a ticket, right? And it's sent over to the dispatcher. She gets on and sends the fare. Okay. Right down to, I mean, I can't tell you how many murders, I've solved where the old taxi, they had the guy's race, just his first name, by accident, right? And maybe those taxi tickets exist. I'm curious if anybody pulled any of the hotel receipts. When who rented the rooms at some of these hotels? Okay? I'm hoping the cops have this stuff somewhere in their case file, sitting back in there.
We've traced on another case that we haven't discussed to the public yet, but we've been able to trace only so far the facts in the case, because all these records, the written records, have been lost, put away, destroyed, and people don't keep them more than 7 years because they don't have to for tax purposes. And even some of the records that we're trying to find that the police had in New York are really hard to come by. We're working at it, but I'm not the police. I only can go so far. So, but those things, you're right about that. Some of these things would have existed, but because nobody did anything for so many years on these cases of any great significance in terms of investigation, so many of those records are gone.
Here's a thought. Believe it or not, accountants for businesses, accountants keep everything. Okay? I learned that a long time ago. If we can't find a record, find out if they had an accountant and then call that guy. And next thing you know it, he'll pick up the phone and say, yeah, what do you need? Say, hey, you got something from way back? Oh yeah, hang on for a second. And next thing you know, he's dusting off, and says, yeah, it's number 4, hypothetically. But so don't give up on just because somebody says we don't have it. If you look on your shirt or your jacket, for an example, there's numbers on it. and it's called an RN number. Okay. And that RN number, I can tell you who made it, when it was made, when it was shipped, who the shipping company was, and where it landed in the United States.
Mm.
If and from just that little RN number, and it's from the Federal Trade Commission. So if you're listening tonight, take a look at your clothing on the labels, and you'll see a little number there. It says RN and then that number. And then you can go over to the Federal Trade Commission, to their website, and you can type that number in. And that's going to tell you what year, what date, what time that piece of clothing was made. Okay. And I can't tell you how many pieces of clothing I've traced back to suspects and got them actually purchasing the clothing on video back in the day. So there's all kinds of things like this that we can keep, thinking through here. But here's a big question for you. How is Jessica's family and how is Shannan's family doing? I should have asked this in the beginning, and forgive me for not asking it in the beginning.
A great question, Chris.
Yeah, I can kind of finish up with that, I suppose, and that is that starting with Jessica Taylor's family, from what I can judge, Mama is very much broken by what has occurred and has not fully recovered from it to this moment. She had a true and has a true love for her baby that she lost. And Jessica's family members, such as Jasmine, they are equally broken. But in her case, in Jasmine's case, she is really working hard to get to the root and the cause and the facts in this case in a way that would surprise anyone how thorough she's been. A real help. As far as Shannan's family, I guess I could say the similar thing. Just like Jessica, who was a sad little girl who went around with a Bible in her pocketbook so that she read. And, think about that when you start thinking about the cruel side of sex work. This girl had a soft heart. Same for Shannan and Shannan's family. Mary Gilbert, she's gone. She's the 12th victim because her daughter, Sarah, killed her because Sarah had lost her mind, and in great part because of the loss of her sister. So we have the 12th and the 13th victim in the Gilbert family. The other sisters are doing their very best, both of them, Cherie and Stevie, and they are really good kids who they haven't given up. They don't want to give up, and they're hurt, they're broken, but they both get along as people will. And I don't think we can understand the connection, the closeness that existed between Shannan and her family and Jessica and her family, because we all always ordinarily assume, as probably Heuermann assumed, that girls in that business, in the sex work business, were isolated from their families, were people who wouldn't be considered or cared about. But both of them were. And therein lies one of the very root causes of the continuing active investigation that wasn't finally left off as a giant series of cold cases. Because the families, they love each other and they won't forget what happened. They won't let it go. And neither will I.
That's awesome. Well said. Well said. Doctor and John, I'm going to give you the final word in totality here in a minute. Dr. Gary, last thoughts. Any thoughts coming to you? Oh, wait, I have one question that just popped up. We need to at least address this. Has Asa been interviewed by detectives? Did anybody know? And if not, do we know why?
it appears that she has not been interviewed from the comments made offhandedly by Ray Tierney, the district attorney, and by Rodney. It doesn't seem that she was interviewed as of yet. And I don't think she was even asked to come in to be interviewed, from what I can judge. There are probably very good reasons for this task force not to have done so. I do not know what they are, but she has not yet been invited. Now, that may have changed just in, say, the last week. I don't know, but she hasn't been. Now, you had heard the district attorney speculate that that Mrs. Ellerup wasn't around because during the three of the murders because she was away on vacation. We know, for example, she was away on vacation in Iceland, where she originated from, during one of the disappearances of the women. She was away in New Jersey in another one, and I believe she was away in possibly Virginia, I think, in the third situation. I'm not sure, but another state. We know that because when you read the district attorney's papers that were filed, her cell phone was away. So her cell phone was on vacation, so to speak. Was she attached to the cell phone? Most likely. But nobody really knows when these girls died. We know when they disappeared. And we don't even know when some of them disappeared. We're only approximating. We know when they disappeared. We don't know when they were murdered. And we don't know, for many of them, when they were moved to where they were found. So there's an open timeline that Mrs. Ellerup's absence does not easily explain. And the fact that she's absent 3 out of 3 times can be viewed in 2 different lights, can't it? In one light, well, she's not there. She's got an alibi. And in the other light, where 3 of her hairs are found on the bodies, 3 out of 3 times she just happens to be away on vacation, at least in theory.
Interesting.
Interesting.
Yeah, right, exactly. Gary, what are your final thoughts tonight, Gary? And then, John, you're going to have the final word, and we have a tradition on our show. The first question I want to, will you come back?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, you have an open platform here to share your insight, and you have been absolutely delightful to have on. We are so grateful for you and all the work that you're doing to bring justice and raise awareness for those who. I always had this, you don't get to choose who your victim is. You don't get to choose. When I worked homicide, our job was just to tell the story. It's not to tell about why they, are the way they are. And that's what you're doing. And I admire that immensely in you. And so, Gary, you got to, I think he's going to know here that we go to Hawaii at the end of this. So when Gary is done, we have a show where we have a song, Gary, that we play. We like to end on a high note here, John, that, okay, kind of brings us back into reality again, away from this reality, because this is real life for people. And, God bless you for what you're doing there. But Dr. Brucato, final thoughts, and then I'm going to jump out here and give the final word to John.
Well, just a couple of things. First of all, as always, I like to dedicate each episode to the victims. I think it's important to remember them far more than we remember whoever it is that killed them. It is a great shame that, people know the name of the offender way more than they know the names of their victims. Let's see what we can do to sort of right that wrong by paying more attention to the victims here. I'd also like to dedicate today's program to Dr. Michael Stone, my mentor, who had his 90th birthday. Some of you will know him as the co-author of The New Evil with me. I love Michael, and I just wanted to kind of send him birthday wishes. I'm also very grateful that Mr. Ray was able to join us. I have no doubt that everyone is now able to see why I became excited listening to him on Court TV. He is, in addition to being a wealth of information, I think someone who has excellent instincts and is picking up on a scent that I think more people should be paying attention to. But in addition, is just a hell of a lot of fun to listen to. He's a very interesting guy, and really knows whereof he speaks. And so I'm very happy that he's here. And I know that all of you will follow his work closely going forward. So thank you, John, for being with us. And I suspect that a lot of the things you're talking about are going to be borne out as the truth unravels about this case. And I hope that some of the psychological thoughts, even though they are in the realm of speculation, I hope that they are of value to you, given that, I have a great deal of experience with offenders who do these kinds of things, and they tend to be pretty similar in their psychologies, so that we can learn from others what might be going on with someone else. So hopefully that's been of interest. Please feel free to stay in touch, and I'll be happy to give thoughts on anything you'd like to ask.
Great. So I guess it's my turn. First of all, I thank both of you gentlemen for having me. And I listened to some very keen insights from a great psychologist and from what seems to me to be a very good cop. Very valuable and useful information. And I should mention that in November, it's our plan in my office and with my helpers to hold a symposium that we're going to make a presentation about all of the evidence that we've gathered up to that time in relation to Shannan Gilbert and Jessica Taylor and others, and of course with respect to Heuermann as well. And we'll let you know when that happens in due course, but we're going to do that. It will be a 3-hour long presentation, so it will go into depth. That's our plan right now. But to finalize, I think I was given the final floor, as it were. So let me just say that I've devoted enormous part of my life, big chunk of my latter part of my life, to arriving at the truth or truths in this case for a variety of reasons, not least of which is that I have nothing but deep sensibilities regarding girls who have been abused, including sex workers. My patron saint, one of them, is Thomas More, a great lawyer, but my other one is St. Mary Magdalene. And so I have a not-for-profit corporation that I've created so as to raise money when we need it for some of the expenses, and it's called Magdalene Dismas Legal Services Society, named after St. Mary Magdalene, who was a woman who was a wild woman in her time and by tradition was a sex worker. And yet she was fortunate and blessed to be at the tomb of Christ on Easter morning. And Dismas was the good thief on the cross, a thief and probably therefore a murderer. And yet he was the first one allowed into heaven, according to Christ. So we have that society. And therein lies some of my motive for driving forward with this case, because those people matter. Those girls have souls. Those souls still live. And though they lost their bodies, perhaps before they were even killed, in a sense, their souls remain. And there is the children of God, just as you are and I am, even as Heuermann is, as hard as that is to swallow. And those girls, they need something they don't have. They need not justice. We've heard enough about justice, that everybody wants justice. I've been a lawyer for 41 years. I know a lot about justice. I have met her. She's cold. She's gray. She's iron-fisted. She's relentless. She is not pleasant. But those girls need something besides justice. They need mercy. They need something that doesn't come easily for any of us, but especially for them. Their souls cannot rest because it is our duty on earth always to try to arrive at truth. And truth will give them mercy, the mercy of God to put them at final rest, which they don't have and they need. And I intend to get it for them by finding the truth. So if you find that a little zealous, a little over the top, so be it. And I've given up enormous amount of time. My practice struggles because of that. I've paid extremely great amounts of money in this case. But so I brag to you about that and say, yes, I've done that. But I've done it for the cause that I've just mentioned and no other. And so, as you heard the commissioner of the police department say, you can turn to John Ray. He gave his official blessing to that. You can turn to me. Well, you can. And I will keep your secrets if that's what you want. Any of you who are out there, and I will help always to arrive at the truth, which is my purpose on earth as it was Thomas More's. And so that's my finish. Thank you.
Hard working every day, I'm stressed out 24/7, babe. No timeouts, wish we could fly away. You and I go to our favorite place. Oh yeah, make special memories together. I'll be your company now and forever. I say we fly away, you and me, go to our favorite place. Feeling the sun on my face in Hawaii. With you, Hawaii. With you, Hawaii. With you, Hawaii. I need a summer breeze, some fresh air to put my mind at ease. No cares. You wanna come with me? Me and you go to our favorite tree. Are you ready now? We jump on a plane now. We're taking away. Yeah, we're taking away. Don't hesitate now. We're taking away. Yeah, we're taking away. We'll never come down. We're going away. Yeah, we're going away. You and me. Feeling the sun on my face in a while.